called conflicted. It's the idea that we don't always know exactly what to do. Sometimes there's different values, different voices, different feelings that conflict with one another inside of our own heart and life. This series is based off a character in particular, and this character in John chapter 18 has a famous conversation with Jesus. And in this conversation, he looks at Jesus and says, "What is truth?" What is truth? Now, this character was conflicted, and we'll see that today. And this whole series is based on this character. We're going to build out the image of this character and see how he relates to us today. This character we're going to be looking at for the next several weeks is Pontius Pilate. And this character, while he plays a very pivotal role in Scripture, also played a very important role in history in general. See, when we approach the Bible, those of us who have been a Christian for a long time, sometimes we lose sight of the fact that these stories take place inside of real, actual history. That the world events that we studied in school coincide with what's going on in the story of the Bible. And Pilate is one of those characters where he played a huge role in the story of culture, world history in general, more than even what we see of him in the pages of Scripture. We do the Bible a disservice, both when we think it is a history textbook, it's not, but when we also divorce it from the history that we know of in general as well. The Bible is the story of God revealing himself to humanity, and as such, it plays an important role in history, and it's a part of history, but that's not its purpose. Its purpose is the revelation of God. And so, while we look at Pilate's words of what is truth, before we can get into his words in particular, we need to understand the world that Pilate lived in. The world that Pilate lived in. And so, because I'm a nerd, I can't do anything short and succinctly. We have to start at the beginning. In Genesis, God created the whole world and put everything in it, and put Adam and Eve in it. Mankind, he created. That's one of the defining ways that God is identified through all of Scripture is as creator. His authority derives from the fact that he is the creator, the one who began it all. But that honestly goes wrong by page 3 of the Bible. And then page 6, there's a global flood where God wipes out all of humanity and starts again. And then there's a tower, and God separates the world. And by chapter 12 pages approximately into the Bible, God says, okay, I'm done dealing with humanity in general. And he chooses one man named Abraham and says, I'm going to deal specifically with you to achieve my purpose. And he says, I will give you 4 things. These are 4 huge pivotal things for understanding the rest of Scripture. He looks at Abraham and says, I will make your name great, meaning you'll be famous. And here we sit 5,000 years later still talking about him. He says, I'm going to make of you a great nation. So a great name and a great nation. He is the father of, honestly, 2 nations. Most of the Arab world can trace their ancestry back to Abraham. And then the Jewish nation. And God says it's through the line of the Jewish line, through his son Isaac. And so we continue. The third promise is that God gives to Abraham is that I'm going to give you a great land. And as you track with the rest of the Old Testament, remember this is only page 12, the rest of the Old Testament largely has to do with the fulfillment of these first 3 promises. And Abraham's name being great, the nation of Israel being built, and then the promised land. If you're a student of the Bible, if you've studied the Bible or read much of the Bible, most of the Old Testament revolves around this land that Abraham was promised. And then the 4th blessing is the reason the rest of the Bible focuses in on this. is that God promises to Abraham is that through you, all the nations of the world will be blessed. That's the reason we track them. That's the reason the Bible is preoccupied with the Israelite nation, is because of this promise to Abraham. And so the nation of Israel grows, and if you're familiar with the Bible, it's filled with many crazy moments as God miraculously delivers the people. But he grows the name of Abraham, he grows the nation of Israel, and he leads them with prophets, priests, judges. And eventually we end up with the nation of Israel in the millions of people, and they're occupying the promised land. And then there's another turning point where the nation says, no longer will we be ruled by a direct representative of God, a prophet, a priest, a judge, someone that's specifically chosen by God. They say, let's elect a king. And so they unify as a people in a way that they never have been. And they elect a King Saul, and following that was David and Solomon. And just so you fit this into world history, Egypt has peaked and is on the decline. And so for a brief moment in world history, during King David's reign and then King Solomon that followed him, the nation of Israel was a world power. They were the dominant nation for a small period of time. And if you read scripture, you hear about David enlarging the kingdom and about tribute being paid to King Solomon from around the world. Solomon's temple was this amazing, beautiful thing that literally people would travel from all the known world to see. But it ended pretty quickly. There was only 3 kings over the unified kingdom. See, Solomon's sons went to war with each other and divided the kingdom north and south, Israel and Judea. And from that point on, the nation of Israel was fractured. As we move forward in the story, eventually we see the rise of the Babylonian Empire. The Babylonian Empire then, due to Israel's sin, God used Babylon to come in and conquer the nation of Israel. And what Babylon did when they conquered a people group was to take the people from their home and move them to somewhere else, severing their cultural ties, severing their religious structure, and indoctrinating them with their own belief system. And yet, despite having no king, the nation of Israel persisted. The Jewish people, in their faith, they kept their faith and culture intact. And it largely had to do with what was called the Sanhedrin. It was this ruling class of Jewish people, not ruling politically, but ruling religiously. It was the priests, the Pharisees, and the Sadducees. Now, if you're familiar with the Bible, when you go to the New Testament, suddenly these people seem to be the villains a lot of time. And yet, for over 400 years, 600 years, they were the ones that kept the Jewish culture intact. They're the ones who kept the worship of God true and following the commandments given to Moses. If you remember following the story of Israel, it seemed like every generation, the whole book of Judges is preoccupied with the idea that the people of every generation forgot God, forgot his rules and commands. And yet, for hundreds of years, the Jewish people did not forget their God, did not forget his commands, his rules, or his ways. By the year 445 BC, just so we all are keeping track, I know it's been a while since some of us have been in history, let alone world history. BC, we count backwards. We count down. So the bigger the number, the further away it is. Now we're counting up, AD. The whole division of time was based off the birth of Christ. BC stands for before Christ. Now that's not politically correct, so we've had to change it because we couldn't have all of history divided by when Christ came. So now it's before Common Era, BCE. AD is Latin for ad distrea, something like that. After death. Literally, we divide history by when Christ came. So 445 BC is when they, before Christ, 450 years, the Medo-Persian Empire started allowing the Jewish people to return to their promised land, to their homeland. and resettled the city of Jerusalem. The story of Nehemiah takes place during this time, as well as many of the prophets. As the Jewish people finally began to return home, the whole Old Testament finishes. The book of Malachi ends at 425 BC. These are in Christian thought called the silent years. Because for over 400 some years, there was no word from God. What should blow our minds is that as we open up the New Testament, is that the Jewish culture and way of life still was almost exactly the same. Think about what was taking place 425 years ago. The first permanent white settlement was being done in America. First. Think of how much our culture and way of life, our values have changed in those 425 years. And yet, largely due to the Sanhedrin, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the priesthood. But let's take a step back from looking just at the nation of Israel for a second and look at world events, because these 400 years were some of the craziest in world history. In about 330 BC, a man burst onto the scenes and conquered the world. Like a wildfire, he swept through the known world. This man's name was Alexander the Great. He was a Greek and literally conquered everything that was known. Established this huge empire that included over the nation of Israel. So here's another time when the nation of Israel was conquered and were occupied. He took over from the remnants of the Medo-Persian Empire. They had been waning for decades, and he swept through it and conquered it all. But the Greek Empire, much like the Israel's empire, was pretty short-lived, all things considered their size and scope. And by the year 165 BC, the Jews had had enough of Greek rule. And so they band together in what was called the Maccabean Revolt in 165 BC. And they were able to unify. It wasn't quite the massive kingdom that was under King David or King Solomon or even the divided kingdom, but it was a unified nation of Israel again. But it wasn't quite the glory years that they envisioned. See, Israel was largely a failure at governing themselves. This kingdom lasted for approximately 100 years, but largely was marked by civil war as family after family fought each other for control. And so that made them, honestly, not even hardly a blip on the radar of the next empire to arise in 65 BC, was again led by a charismatic leader named Julius Caesar. As Rome swept through and conquered the Mediterranean basin, and his empire kept expanding. It's in 65 BC, and Rome, as opposed to Babylon came in, conquered the people, and then removed the people, wanted to sever their cultural heritage, sever their religious belief system, and integrate them into the Babylonian way of life. Rome largely didn't care. They're like, we don't care what you worship, we don't care what you do, you have to give lip service to us. And so what they would typically do is appoint a representative from the people group that they conquered to rule them. Now, they had to bow the knee to Rome, they had to pay taxes to Rome, and they have to not rebel. So they had to keep the peace, keep paying taxes, and that stuff. And so Julius Caesar appointed a man named Herod the Great. These are names you should be starting to ring a bell. Herod the Great was appointed in 50 BC. He was a Jew, but one that had willingly bowed the knee to Rome. Herod was a brutal, violent man, known for his quick temper. Honestly, he was paranoid beyond all belief. But he did do some really good things, and in 20 BC, he began a building project. It became the temple in Jerusalem. He rebuilt the temple, and it was completed in 10 BC. This is the temple that the Jewish people would have been worshiping at. This is the temple that Jesus would have gone to. It was completed in 10 BC. And for the first time in hundreds of years, the Jews had a temple again. And so they flocked by the hundreds of thousands to Jerusalem for their key festivals. They have 3 every year, the biggest of which is Passover. Now, this is also a time period, 20s to the 10s BC, is when the whole Roman world was in chaos. Some of these names you may remember: Mark Antony, Marcus Brutus, Cleopatra, Caius Octavius. See, when Julius Caesar died, he had not really appointed an heir. And so the whole Roman world, which was most of the known world at the time, fell into civil war that engulfed the whole Mediterranean basin and the Fertile Crescent. These battles were all over the place, sea battles and land battles. And so it was a terrible, tumultuous time in world history. The suffering would have been huge. But eventually, Caius Octavius won out and became Caesar Augustus. And those of you that are familiar with the Christmas story know it opens with, and Caesar Augustus commanded that all the world be counted. Why? Because he's the new Roman emperor. And that had tremendous bearing on an engaged couple that had to travel to Bethlehem. So let's zoom back in on Israel's history. So Herod the Great is ruler, and Herod the Great, I told you, was a violent, evil man. And he gets word that there is this new king born. His job is to make sure that there is no king, that there is only emperor. Emperor Caesar Augustus. So his position, his power and rule is threatened. He's mandated with keeping the peace, and so he violently murders all the children in this small village under 2 years of age. Shortly after that, the great Herod died. And the Jews were so excited to be finally free of him, but he had these sons that were going to take over. And so the Jewish people looked at his sons and thought they're not nearly as powerful as Herod the Great was. So the Jews at Passover band together to revolt against Herod's son, Archelaus. This is in 4 BC. But Archelaus was not weak. In fact, he had an army of mercenaries hired. And so as hundreds of thousands of largely innocent Jews flocked to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover, there was a rebellion. And so Archelaus ordered the cavalry in to the Temple Mount to charge these hundreds of thousands of pilgrims there at Passover to worship. And 3,000 Jews were killed that day. We have a massacre site up the road where less than 10 people died, correct? We call it a massacre. The Boston Massacre is this pivotal moment in American history. Massacre seems a bit of a stretch. And yet 3,000 Jews were killed by the sword in the temple at that Passover. Herod Archelaus went a little bit further, and he arrested 2,000 more agitators, as he dubbed them, and hung them on crosses outside of Jerusalem. And contrary to Jewish law and custom, he left the dead bodies out to rot. Bodies were never allowed to stay out, to stay unburied over the Sabbath. But this, remember, their goal was threefold. The Romans wanted the culture preserved, wanted peace kept, and wanted the taxes to keep flowing. And so by 6 AD, the culture, just uprising, the tension in Israel and in Jerusalem and Judea was so high that Rome stepped in and said, Israel, you are no longer capable of governing yourself. And in 6 AD, they appointed a Roman governor over them. This was the end of the autonomy of a Jewish leader, Herod, being able to murder his own people. Rome took away the right of the Jews to govern themselves because they had done such a poor job of it. But Caesar Augustus died. Caesar Augustus he ascended to the throne. He became emperor through conquest, through defeating his challengers. And while nobody would ever accuse him of being a good man, he was at least a fairly fair emperor as far as that goes. But the emperor that came after him, Emperor Tiberius, was not. He was a vile, evil man. Read some of the atrocities he committed, and it'll make you want to throw up. But he likewise, weird as it is to believe, he actually knew the Jewish culture and admired it. Maybe because he was so far into self-indulgence that their strict religious life just was mind-blowing to him. And so he wanted the Jewish culture in particular preserved. He didn't want that way of life to disappear. Fast forward a couple years to 26 AD. 26 AD. And there are 3 Herods currently ruling. Now, they're not the ultimate rulers. They are a ruler. They're ruling different regions. And one of them, Herod Antipas, one of the sons of Herod the Great, is ruling over a region called Galilee. And there's this Jewish prophet there that's getting really mouthy, creating quite the stir. People are flocking out of the cities to go see him and hear him. But then, and he's largely okay with that, until this Jewish prophet turns and starts attacking Herod's. Not just Herod, but Herod's sex life. So after this Jewish prophet begins attacking him, he eventually arrests him and eventually beheads this man. Which for the thousands of people that thought him a prophet, this is yet another in the long line of provocations from the Herods and from Rome. It's this same year that Rome sends a new governor. It's been 20 years now since Rome has had the governorship over Israel. And this new man is appointed, the 5th one, named Pontius Pilate. Now, this is both an honor to be named governor and a disgrace. Because Israel is known for their religious fundamentalism. They're this uptight group of people that are also extremely prone to rebellion. They constantly keep rebelling. Not only that, but it was viewed as kind of a cultural backwater. It wasn't Rome. It wasn't even Greek. It wasn't even Asia Minor. It was this cultural backwater with a religiously uptight, stiff-necked, rebellious people. But it was still being a governor with incredible opportunity to advance. And so Pilate gladly accepts the appointment from Emperor Tiberius, who, again, remember the 3 things Tiberius wants. He wants him to keep the peace, to preserve Jewish culture, and to keep the taxes flowing back to Rome. In Pilate's first weeks in office, he makes an incredible misstep. See, in Jerusalem, he's based out of Capernaum, which is on the coast of the Mediterranean, is largely a Roman city, so he prefers to stay there. But at least 3 times a year, he has to travel to Jerusalem for the Jewish holy days, where hundreds of thousands of Jews flock to the temple. And Pontius Pilate orders that Jerusalem put up all of these standards of Emperor Tiberius. Remember, this is the guy who just gave him his job. So Pilate's like, hey, I need to get in his good favor, and I need to stay in his good graces. So he puts his standard up all over Jerusalem. Not just that, but then he puts up Emperor Tiberius busts all over the place. That's the top part. I hope you've been seeing them scroll through. Now, this is a huge misstep because he didn't understand the Jewish culture or way of life. And the Jews followed 10 commandments handed down from Moses and 660 other commandments strictly. And the second of the 10 commandments is don't make any graven image, don't bow down to them or serve them. And so the Jewish people stand together united and say, we will not stand for this. They're on the edge of revolt, but it's not a revolt like before where there was maybe some military might attached. This is a peaceful revolution when they say we will not stand for this. And so what they did was literally they would go up and bend over like this and extend out their necks to the Roman centurions, saying, take my life. You cannot do this. So again, remembering Pilate's dual nature mandate, tri-nature mandate there of keeping the peace, preserving the Jewish culture, and making sure that the money keep flowing back, he couldn't have another revolt. Men had been killed for much less than that. So as both a sign of wisdom and a sign of self-preservation, he quickly backs down. He realizes that he needs to know more about the Jewish culture and way of life so he doesn't make terrible mistakes like that. So in an effort to both preserve his own life and to increase his own power and influence, Pilate seeks out the local high priest named Caiaphas and forms an uneasy alliance with this man. He doesn't trust Caiaphas, and Caiaphas doesn't trust him, but they realize that they have to work together because despite having different languages, worshiping different gods, literally eating different foods, they both are united in the utter conviction that they can do whatever it takes to preserve their power. See, Caiaphas was the high priest, but he was immensely wealthy. In fact, he came from a lineage of high priests. And most of their wealth revolved around the temple that Herod the Great built. And there was what was called the temple tax. For every pilgrim that wanted to enter into the temple, they had to pay a tax, which largely went right into Herod's pocket. Caiaphas' pocket. And so Caiaphas and his family had built their incredible wealth on that. Now, they had also preserved the worship of God. People knew the 10 Commandments and largely followed them. Caiaphas had extreme power and influence, and so Pilate partnered with him. So Pilate is now torn between Caiaphas, the Jewish high priest, and Tiberius, both of whom he knows that he really can't trust. And then there's this new Jewish prophet on the scene. One with massive crowds following him. And one day this prophet shows up at the temple. Literally the source, the center of Caiaphas' power and influence. And he starts throwing tables around. He makes a whip and starts driving out the priests and the money changers, the tax collectors, everybody that's there that's in service to Caiaphas. He's the one whose center of power this is. And so Caiaphas continues to plot how to get this man murdered. And later that week, he arrests this Jewish prophet named Jesus and drags him before his friend, his partner, Pilate, and says, I want you to kill this man. And that's where we pick up the story in John chapter 18. So turn to John chapter 18. We're going to be in verse 33. John 18, verse 33. So here Pilate enters, verse 33, his headquarters again and called Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Keep in mind the three tensions Pilate's under. Keep the peace, keep the taxes, keep the culture. Part of keeping the peace is making sure there's not active rebellion, that they're not trying to crown a new king, which they've done multiple times in their recent history. "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you say this of your own accord? Or did others say it to you about me?" I love Pilate. Pilate, am I a Jew? Like, this is his whole issue. Is like, I don't get you people. You're crazy. Am I a Jew? Your own nation and chief priests have brought you here, have delivered you over to me. What have you done? And Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not of this world." Again, twice he says, "My kingdom is not of this world." Then Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" And Jesus answered, "You say that I'm a king. For this purpose I was born. For this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. And everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." And this is where Pilate, I'm at just utter exasperation. What is the truth? What is the truth? Pilate is conflicted. He's torn between conflicting desires, justice and his own power, conflicting voices of Caiaphas and Peter and Tiberius and Jesus, and conflicting facts, conflicting values, conflicting truth claims, conflicting worldviews. So when Pilate cries out, "What is truth?" it's not just this tongue-in-cheek words. It's the cry of his heart. Because he has no idea what to do, what to think, what to believe. Are we any different? We can scroll through social media and be like, what is true? Watching the news, reading the news, what is true? You watch a video, oh, that's true. Then you watch another video from a different angle and you're like, oh, well, what is true? You hear a friend sharing something and is that true? You go to Google and it's fact-checked, but the fact-checked explanation also says it's false, but then in the explanation proves it's true. What? You experience something. Is that true? You have a feeling. Is that true? See, like Pilate's world was incredibly complicated. How about our world? These are taken from this week's headlines that I saw. Did Russia invade or did Ukraine provoke? Are gas prices up because of Biden or in spite of Biden? Going back to Ukraine, is Ukraine a just bastion of virtue that's fighting the oppressor, or were they paying Hunter Biden billions of dollars? Oh, does cutting oil from Russia help keep Putin in control, or does it hurt Russia's ability to wage war? Oh, do masks work or not? Do Black Lives Matter, or should we never say those words? Do Ukrainian, this is a direct quote, do Ukrainian lives not matter until Black lives matter? Or do all lives matter? Should we call someone by their preferred pronoun? Or should we not feed into false ideology? Is social justice a good thing, or is social justice a bad thing? Even better, is social justice the gospel, or is social justice opposed to the gospel? Is immigration a good thing, or is immigration a bad thing? Here's a good one. Is Trump paid by Russia, or is Biden paid by Russia? Oh, is Trump paid by China, or is Biden paid by China? Literally, headlines this week, guys. Does inflation help those who are in debt, or does it hurt those who are in debt? Does inflation help the poor, or does inflation hurt the poor? Does being a racist mean what you think and do, or does it mean the color of your skin and your position of power? What's true? We all have the answers, right? We clearly know. Where you stand on all of these issues is determined by your worldview. One author calls your worldview your madness machine. And you enter these big questions into your worldview, your madness machine, and whatever spits out is determined by your worldview. So Pilate's worldview, let's look at Pilate's worldview real quickly. Pilate's madness machine, how he answered the big questions, were determined by a couple of things. First, he worshipped the Roman gods, which were there's kind of a hybrid between the Greek and the Roman gods. There's this confusing mixture. But the Greco-Roman world with dozens of gods that they worship for different things and offer sacrifices to that. So he worshiped those gods, did not believe in a monotheistic religion, in a one religion that the Jews would have. He worshiped different things. But beyond that, the Roman world really worshiped one thing. Beyond all their gods that they worshiped one thing: power. And you see this from the way Pilate lived his life, as he was worshiping power. But power is a terrible thing to worship, because how you are in power determines where you get your power from. So think through Pilate's life. What is he getting power from? He's getting power from his relationship with Caiaphas. But he's also getting power from his relationship with Tiberius. And he's also getting power from the fact that he governs the Jewish people. This is the exasperation coming out of his question, what is truth? Is where do I get my power from? And it's conflicted. He's literally getting different answers, and this forms the crisis point for all of us. Is what happens when our madness machines start conflicting. So what about us? See, there's three main types of madness machines. The first comes from the Enlightenment. Since the Enlightenment, we've largely been science. Science means, what is the facts? What is true? What is objectively true out there? It's the truth, the science behind it. Since the Enlightenment, most of Western world has been concerned with this one. Science, what is factually true? By the way, Pilate would have kind of fallen under this. Factually true, Tiberius was emperor. Factually true, he had his position because of Tiberius. Factually true, he needed Caiaphas to help understand Jewish culture and custom. This leads to his dilemma. The worst thing you could be to someone with a science worldview, with a science madness machine, is wrong. Factually untrue. But see, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, we as a society pivoted away from that. We pivoted away from society to self. No longer are we concerned about facts, but now it's how do you feel about it. What's true for you is true for you. By the way, this is every Disney and Hallmark movie. Be true to who you are. All of these have some truth, but it's a terrible worldview for finding true, because what happens when what's true for you is true for you, it's true for me, it's true for me, but what happens when we have different desires? What happens when our actions rub against each other? How do we say what's wrong? See, the worst thing you could be in 70s, 80s, 90s, 2010s, early 2000s, would be intolerant. That's the worst thing. For me growing up, if you were intolerant, that was the worst thing. But it's been crazy, and if you've been paying attention, the last 10 years have seen this rapid shift away from that. No longer does our worldview build off self. Instead, it's this third S. It's society. So it was facts. Then it became feelings. Now it's factions. It's my group against your group. It's society. We as a group get to decide what's right and wrong. And here's the thing about factions, is your faction is always the right faction. And they're the wrong ones. You're the good, noble ones. Which makes them the evil people. Which makes you the anti-racist and them the racist. Which makes you the pro-lifers and them the anti-lifers. And we've based our whole worldview off society. By the way, the worst thing you could be to somebody with a society worldview is outside of the popular decision of what's right and wrong. Does that not explain most of what we see in our world? In our culture? The worst thing you could be is against society's decision of what is morally right. So what happens when you get different answers from your madness machine? What happens when you're like Pilate and where do I get my source of power? And it's too many different answers. See, there comes a moment when each of us has to recognize that our worldview does not hold up. Science, self, society, all fail to deal with the biggest questions of life. And so we end up like Pilate. What is true? I don't know what to believe anymore. I don't know what to believe about myself. I don't know what to believe about society. I don't know what to believe about science. Anybody feel frustrated by that? I've literally heard every different thing this week. And I'm like, I don't know. There's a fourth S. A fourth madness machine we could use to build our life on. And that is Scripture. The revelation of the person and work of Jesus Christ. See, here's the irony of all ironies is that Pilate was standing there saying, what is truth? And he's having a conversation with Jesus Christ, who earlier that very week had told his disciples, I am the way, the truth, and the life. See, here's both the irony and the tragedy of our humanity, of our madness machines, is we can be like Pilate, standing face to face with the truth and never recognize it. Because we love darkness, the Bible says, because our deeds are evil. It explains why we refuse to acknowledge the truth. Pilate was literally face to face with the one who had just proclaimed himself as the truth, and he still could not recognize him. See, here's the issue. With all competing worldviews, and by the way, we listed 3 big ones, but worldviews are as unique as the people on the earth. Those are 3 big categories, but we all have our own unique distortions of the world. But all of these, science, self, society, the problem with all of them is that they're what's called in the immanent frame. They're things that we can see, touch, feel. They're inside creation. And the Bible makes a big distinction between creation and non-creation. There's one very big, very powerful thing that's non-creation, and that's God himself, revealed to us through the word of Scripture. And here's the thing about everything else that we turn to. Everything inside of creation is constantly changing. There's literally nothing that does not change inside of creation. The very fabric of the universe is expanding. There is no solid footing to stand. Here is truth, and I will stand on it inside of creation. It is only when we get our eyes outside of creation, outside of the constantly changing world, and look to Scripture, look to the great I am, the Holy One, the unchangeable one, the separate one, that we can begin to say, this is truth. This is what is real. And so we need to learn to question our madness machines, to say, does my worldview, does my belief system line up with what Scripture says is true? So I've got some questions as we wrap up. Is your mind more filled with the madness machine of right-wing politics than on the true power of Scripture? Which one do you think more about? Is your mind more filled with the madness machine causes of social justice than the true purpose of Scripture? Is your mind more filled with the madness machine information of Facebook than the true informer of Scripture? Is your mind more filled with the madness machine filters of Instagram than the true filter of Scripture? Pull out your daily time report on your phone. Which one did you spend more time filling your mind with this week? Is your mind more filled with the madness machine of your own feelings than the true emotion of Scripture? Is your mind more filled with the madness machine of your own self-sufficiency than the true dependency described in Scripture? Is your mind more filled with the cares of this world than the peace and understanding offered in Scripture? Is your mind conflicted by your madness machine? Maybe it's too filled. Maybe you need to trash that old madness machine and instead replace it with the unchangeable one. Scripture says of itself, the grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of our God endures forever. This is the firm foundation to plant your feet. Let's pray. God, I pray that you come in and renew our minds, that we meditate on you, the great I am, the unchangeable one, that our minds are filled with you. God, I pray this week, whether we do our personal study time in the morning or at night or whenever it is, God, that we absolutely schedule that and make that a priority and don't allow anything to interfere with getting into your word so we can be a wise and discerning generation of believers who knows what is right and what is wrong, and we can recognize it. God, I pray that we know you. God, we want to get into Scripture because Scripture is you. And you point us to who you are. It's your revelation of who you are. It brings life, peace, understanding. God, I pray for my own life. I pray for the lives of all those here today, listening online, that we put you first. that we put a pursuit of you above everything else.